Good evening. Good evening. If I could have your attention, please. It's quite a lively crowd tonight. My goodness, all the talent that keeps our social insurance programs moving. All in one room. Very impressive crowd tonight. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm Larry Atkins. I'm the president of the National Academy of Social Insurance. And on behalf of the Academy's Board of Directors, it's my great pleasure to welcome you and thank you all for joining us in this evening to celebrate social insurance by recognizing the contributions of Marilyn Moon, who is one of our most outstanding contributors to social insurance policy. And I think this turnout tonight shows that it is a high moment in the history of the Academy to have the opportunity to award Marilyn, who's a longstanding member and was former president, the honor of being a Bob Ball Award winner. So the award honors our founder, Robert Ball, who was a major force in the development of Social Security and Medicare. And the people who are gathered here tonight are all here as a testament to Marilyn's leadership and achievements and contributions in this field. It's also a testimony to her leadership that so many organizations and individuals have chosen to support this year's award event. And I will tell you that the event committee and the group that has worked on this program tonight have done an incredible job. And I'd like to recognize our top sponsors tonight, who they brought to the table, are the Medicare Rights Center, AARP, the Commonwealth Fund, the California Healthcare Foundation, and the American Hospital Association. So the support that we get for this event does a tremendous amount to help the Academy overall in a lot of new initiatives that we bring out in research and education and in development of leadership, new leadership in social insurance. I'd also like to thank other major sponsors for tonight's event, and they are major contributors as well: the American Institutes for Research, Avalier Health, Ascension Health, Johnson & Johnson, SEIU, United Health Group, and Apt Associates. So please, thank you. So you can find all of our sponsors on the website. Tonight is a great success thanks to the energy and the commitment of the event committee co-chairs. Bruce Vladeck, who unfortunately cannot be with us tonight because of a family event, is the winner of the 2005 Robert M. Ball Award, and Kathy Swartz, professor at the Harvard School of Public Health, who is here tonight at the head table. But Bruce and Kathy led an all-star event committee, with many of whom are with us in person this evening. So I'd like to just recognize them. I don't ask them to stand and take bows, but you all know them anyway, so you can find them and thank them yourself. But Karen Davis, Susan Denser, Judy Fader, Liz Fowler, Steve Goss, Pam Hurd, Chris Jennings, Bob Reischauer, Stan Ross, and Gene Sterling. So thank you. I'd also like to add extra thanks to Judy Fader, who chaired the 2014 Ball Award Selection Committee, and it was Judy's leadership that identified Marilyn as the appropriate winner for the 10th award. I think before Judy, we were finished appointing Judy, I think she'd already figured that out. So, you know, anyway, it's a great personal pleasure for me to be able to have Marilyn here tonight, and I will not have any more to do with this other than to introduce the very distinguished Chris Jennings, who you all know, and to ask him to come to the podium and to introduce our even more distinguished, I'm sorry, Chris, guest tonight. So without any more, Chris.
Well, thank you, Larry, or I guess I should say President Atkins. You have waited 30 years of my working with and against you to say that. I know that was one of your bucket list items, so check. Seriously, we do appreciate your leadership, Larry, and really everyone in this room for this evening tonight and the appropriate winner of this esteemed award, Marilyn Moon. I am pinch hitting for Bruce Vladeck due to unfortunate circumstances and the death in the family, and I know, Marilyn, that he wishes he could be here. He loves to be in front of you all anyway and tell you what you should be thinking and doing. But really, as Larry points out, I am just the in-between introducer of the most distinguished guest of honor that we have today, other than our honoree, of course, which is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius. Sure. She really honors us with her presence tonight, as she has with her service to the nation, which I really have every confidence will continue after she hands over the reins to Sylvia in the upcoming days and weeks. Anyone who knows the Secretary knows that public service is a long-standing legacy of both her and her family. She knows the imperative of continued commitment to social insurance and our health care safety net. This is reflected in her tireless work to implement the law, to strengthen the Medicare Trust Fund, to combat waste, fraud, and abuse, to improve prevention and prescription drug benefits, to constrain cost growth to really historical levels of the Medicare program, and to set the stage for future reforms that will sustain the success that the program has already achieved and is all too often not acknowledged to be currently seeing. Her leadership in quietly working with Republican governors and legislatures, which is no easy task in this environment, to take advantage of extraordinary opportunities with the ACA expansion of the Medicaid program is legendary, at least with people who know and people who will soon know for years to come. She has been steadfast on that, on reducing racial and ethnic disparities, improving treatment for women and children, implementing mental health parity. She has evidenced extraordinary leadership in investing in and providing incentives for all our healthcare providers to use and communicate through a modernized HIT infrastructure system. I think you even had an event today at Datapalooza this morning, Madam Secretary. Truly, her work has been essential and groundbreaking and will stand the test of time. It was almost 50 years ago that her father, Congressman then, Jack Gilligan, the first person I ever worked for, by the way, in politics, cast his vote in favor of the enactment of the Medicare program, a vote that people don't know but contributed to the loss of his re-election bid, but also contributed to saving and improving the lives, health, and security of literally hundreds of millions of Americans. And suffice to say, history certainly served him well. And there is no question in my mind that it will certainly treat one Kathleen G. Sebelius extremely well as well. It has been the cause of her life, as well as it has been the cause of many of us in this room, and we are all the better for it. So on behalf of all of us at NASI, I want to thank you for your service, Kathleen, Secretary Sebelius. We look forward to reading the next chapter of your book that documents your inevitable future contributions to the cause. please join me in welcoming the 21st Secretary of Health and Human Services, someone I am truly proud to call my friend and colleague of over 20 years, Kathleen Sebelius.
Thank you. Thank you. So Marilyn, thank you. Well, thank you all very much for that very kind and warm welcome. It's nice to be back with NASI. I think this is my third time to come to this dinner. I came first as an insurance commissioner from Kansas, and then came back in 2011, and now it's nice to be back again. And I see so many friends and incredible health leaders in this room. It's humbling to be here and realize the institutional knowledge contained in this room and the legacy of social insurance that continues to benefit millions and millions in this country. Chris Jennings has been a friend for over 20 years, and he taught me a lot about healthcare and about Washington and about how to navigate thorny shoals in this town. And I was grateful to him then, and I continue to be grateful now and look forward to continuing to work with him. But when he asked me to come tonight, I said I really can't come for the entire event, but I'd love to come and just join my voice in paying tribute to Marilyn. It is really a privilege to join all of you to honor a woman who's really done transformative work, and not just in her own thinking, but really shared her thinking with thousands of people and taught them how to think about Medicare and our entire healthcare system. I think Marilyn has not only shared a commitment to the issues, but she and I share another common bond. Marilyn is a sunflower sister. She comes out of Kansas. And as many, too many of the more liberal end of Kansans go, she's out of the sunflower state. And, I'm here to tell you, they need you back. She grew up in El Dorado, which is the town where Barack Obama's mother was raised, and in Augusta, Kansas, and Butler County, not too far from Wichita. And one of her first forays into public service was actually working for a Kansas Republican Congressman, Joe Skubitz, who I got to know because my father-in-law, Keith Sebelius, was one of his colleagues. One of her very first reports as an analyst at the Congressional Budget Office was produced in collaboration with Bob Dole, another Kansan. And those were the days when actually Republicans and Democrats worked together on things that they believed in. Bob Dole actually, just a little anecdote, was the person to take me to both the Finance and the Help Committee in the Senate and introduce me, which was very helpful. It was a significant report, Marilyn's first report, because she was actually able to show that the vast majority of senior citizens in this country are low income, and that when they're asked to shoulder too much of the burden of the cost of their care, it actually reduces their cost of care, and that made a difference to a lot of people. And the notion, which is unfortunately radical to some, that policy should actually protect and take into account the most vulnerable among us, has served really as the foundation of much of the work that Marilyn has done during the course of her career. And at AARP and the Urban Institute and everywhere else her career has taken her, her work has served as a convincing and continual reminder of that common theme. Now, many of us remember the debate around the Health Security Act during the Clinton administration. And a lot of you may recall reading one of Marilyn's patient advocate columns for the Washington Post during that time, when she served as a singular voice, calling on policymakers and politicians to consider the very real impact that health policy has on the lives of real American people. They help simplify an impossibly complicated issue, offering clear, concise answers to people who wrote in with questions about the healthcare system, all the while underscoring the need for consumers to be empowered to make informed choices and forcing consumer-friendly insurance reform, something that we're still at today and trying to push forward. Now, her voice, in many ways, helped set the stage for the historic reforms we've been able to achieve over the past few years through the Affordable Care Act. And I can tell you her voice in translating complicated policies is welcomed, and also cutting through the din of what is often a series of misinformation. But her voice also echoed the vision of Lyndon Johnson, who is one of her heroes and one of mine. No longer, Johnson said, will older Americans be denied the healing miracle of modern medicine. No longer will illness crush and destroy the savings that they've so carefully put away over a lifetime so that they might enjoy dignity in their later years. And no longer will young families see their own incomes and their own hopes eaten away. Now, with Marilyn's help and with the help of so many in this room, the promise of President Johnson's vision has now been extended to all Americans. And as LBJ said as he signed Medicare into law, this commitment to ensuring access to care is, quote, not just our tradition or the tradition of the Democratic Party. It is old as the day it was first commanded. Thou shalt open thy hand wide unto thy brother, to the poor, to thy needy in thy land. Now that tradition, which you all continue to honor with this association and work on every day, and that tradition carried on by Marilyn, carried on by all of you, perfectly reflects the objective of the Robert M. Ball Award, to promote public understanding and informed policymaking when it comes to social insurance. So tonight, as we honor Marilyn, I know I speak for many in this room when I say we owe her, all of us owe her, 300 million Americans owe her a great debt of gratitude. Marilyn, it's my great privilege to be here to recognize you and join everyone in this room to celebrate you, to celebrate your career, your many accomplishments, and what I know will be your numerous contributions to come. So thank you, Sunflower Sister. Thanks to all of you for this invitation, and thank you for choosing such a wonderful awardee. Congratulations.
Secretary, before you leave, you've been here many times with the press club, and you know that they give press club swag. We have NASI swag here. And I thought I was going to be able to pull out a prop, but apparently that's not the case. But I know there's a water bottle, and since you run, that's much more useful than a teacup or a damn coffee cup. So here you go. And on behalf of all the NASI board, the leadership, the membership, all the supporters here, we also want to confer on you an honorary membership to NASI, which you already have ex officio, but we're going to give it to you anyway. Thank you.
I'm Bob Reischauer. I think Chris was supposed to say I was coming up. maybe I'm reading the program wrong. Anyway, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to be part of this celebration because Marilyn, I count as a dear friend, a former colleague at the Urban Institute and the Congressional Budget Office, and as a teacher. I've had sort of many times which I've thought I knew something about Medicare and then said, better check what Marilyn said, and reformed my view, shall I put it that way. But I'm not here to praise Marilyn. Other voices more capable than I will do that. I'm here to introduce Bill Gradison, who will be the next speaker. Bill, after sort of mistaken forays into banking and other things, was elected to the City Council of Cincinnati and in fact served a year as the mayor of Cincinnati. Now before that becomes too big a thing, you should know that every member of the City Council got a year as the mayor. But you didn't hear it from me, but Carrie Gradison, when she heard that I was going to substitute as the person to introduce Bill, tried to pay me off and find another person who might do this. After being on the City Council of Cincinnati, Bill was elected to Congress from the district there and served for 19 years. He was elected in 1974, which was a particularly good year because not only did it signal the introduction of a rational, intelligent member of Congress who could work across the aisle, but it also was the first year that CBO existed. And Bill was a supporter, a user, a defender of CBO, and for that, personally, I thank him a great deal. He also had the wisdom, when he became a member of Congress, to choose the right committees. He was on the Budget Committee, good choice, and on Ways and Means, better choice. And within Ways and Means, he also was, both because he impressed his colleagues and he had good judgment, he was a member of the Health Subcommittee and the Social Security Subcommittee, which is quite relevant to NASI, and he involved himself in important pieces of legislation, which the influence of which we all feel today. I name one being the indexing of the income tax parameters, which he was an influential force on. The 1983 legislation that extended the solvency of Social Security, the 1984 Tax Reform Act, which redefined the non-statutory fringe benefit definitions for the IRS. This one's a little tricky for me, but he also was the main instigator of moving Social Security off budget. You know, we'll wait for a judgment on that. And don't clap. And he was the vice chair of the Pepper Commission. So he goes back a long way on the issues that we care about, and he's been on the right side of those issues, for the most part. He left Congress and in 1993 and headed up the Health Insurance Association of America for 6 years. He's been a scholar in residence at Duke's Fuqua School of Business, focusing on healthcare management. He's been a very valuable member of MedPAC, commissioner of MedPAC, and the vice chair of the Commonwealth Fund's Task Force on Academic Health Centers. But most important to me in later life, He is a lover of French opera and a supporter, and for that, he is eminently qualified to say a few words about Maryland.
I'm sure glad Bob went before me, because I get to set the record straight and he doesn't get any more time at the podium. I do want to say a word about how pleased I am, and I know all of us this evening are, that the Secretary could be with us. There are one or two things that she didn't mention that I should, and I'm not trying to take away from Kansas. My grandfather was from Lawrence, but the Secretary grew up in my hometown, or I grew up in her hometown. Her father and I served together on city council there for a dozen years or more, and her father-in-law and I served together in the House of Representatives. He happened to be a Republican, but we won't hold that against her after all. When Bruce Vladeck contacted me about being here, it was a pretty easy thing to say yes. First of all, it kind of intrigued me that there were still opportunities for meaningful and important things to be done in Washington, D.C. by moderate Republicans. That's pretty amazing these days. Also, I've been a long-standing card-carrying, dues-paying member of NASI, and very, very excited, actually, over the years by the role that's been played and the leadership that Pam and others of you have given it to bring it to its current state of play. But the most important reason I'm here, and we're all here, is because Marilyn Moon is the perfect choice for an award that carries the name of Bob Ball. I can't really improve upon a nominating letter which I recently saw, and therefore I'm going to read you a paragraph from it. For more than 2 decades, Marilyn has been perhaps the preeminent academic scholar of Medicare and Medicare policy, but she has always endeavored to communicate the products of her scholarship to a broader audience. Not only are Medicare now and in the future, and Medicare a policy primer, the go-to works in their field, but they are especially accessible, as they are designed to be, to non-expert policymakers, teachers, and students. Furthering public understanding and informed policy making is what Marilyn has been doing on a day-by-day basis for 30 years. Beyond saying amen to those well-chosen words, I'd add a personal note. In my various capacities over the years, as you can tell from Bob's introduction, I've had trouble holding a job, but but when policy recommendations and reports came across my desk with Marilyn's name on it, I took them seriously because it was her work. And I know I'm not alone in that. Without trying your patience, I want to make one particular point and put some of my thinking in perspective. Social insurance has had its giants. On my short list are Bob Ball, Bob Myers, Wilbur Cohen, and a name that may not be known to all of you, Marion Folsom. He was my boss in Washington, my first stint here in the executive branch for a period of about 5 years. He grew up in a small town, McRae, Georgia, which was the ancestral home of the Talmadge family. He told me that at the time the only Republican in the county was the postmaster because there was a Republican president. That's how things were at the time. After serving in World War I and graduating from the University of Georgia in the Harvard Business School, he went to work for Eastman Kodak in Rochester. I remember his saying, he said, "Bill, when I moved to Rochester, I found that the people who were Democrats back home were Republicans in Rochester." And it's an interesting thought. He later became assistant to George Eastman. This was before Mr. Eastman committed suicide in 1928. And eventually, Mr. Folsom became treasurer and a director of Kodak, but more appropriate to what we're here tonight about. He served on the advisory council to President Roosevelt's Committee on Economic Security in 1934, and I think on every subsequent advisory council until he joined the Eisenhower administration, first as Undersecretary of the Treasury, and soon thereafter as the second secretary. I was surprised to hear there have been 21 secretaries, but I just knew the first couple. I was a very junior, my memory is, I was a very junior member of the Harvard Business School faculty before he brought me to Washington as assistant. I learned a lot from him about Social Security and retirement programs, a subject which had interested me actually before I had ever met Mr. Folsom. My doctoral dissertation was on the investment of corporate pension funds, which at the time were growing very rapidly in both in number and in size. I bring up Mr. Folsom for this reason, because it calls to my mind his concern about whether new entrants to the civil service, he was thinking particularly of Social Security Administration, whether new entrants to the civil service would match up to those who would soon be retiring, that is, those who came to the government during the 1930s, when private sector opportunities for top-notch actuaries, lawyers, accountants, among others, were few and far between. Ball, Myers, and Cohen all began their careers here during the 1930s. I was acquainted with those towering figures of yesteryear. Probably knew Bob Myers the best. For a time, he acted as a consultant to us on the minority side on the Ways and Means Committee when we were working on Social Security issues. It turned out Mr. Folsom had nothing to really be worried about. Those earlier heroes have been replaced by new giants who have taken their place, Marilyn Moon among them. The thing, though, that struck me about those folks that I referred to as the earlier heroes is not that they always agreed with each other. Certainly the two Bobs did not on a lot of issues, but that they sought to persuade through reasoned argument, light rather than heat, which is a little unusual these days, not just with issues having to do with social insurance. And it's largely unclear to me why this is the case. Now I'm an observer rather than a participant in the issues of the day, and I've tried to understand why is today so different. I suspect in part that it is explained by basic philosophic differences about the relative roles of the individual, the family, the community, and various levels of government. Said another way, on some of the issues of today, disagreement is not about the means alone, but also about the ends. And I think that that's part of the problem that we face. Some folks, seems to me, at times avoid letting facts interfere with their opinions. I had a roommate in college who used to drive me crazy. Exam time, I'm working away and preparing for exams, and he'd go out and see every movie in New Haven. And I asked him, I had Joe, I don't know, how can you do this when exams start next Monday? He said, Bill, I like to approach these things unprejudiced by the facts. And I guess he's not alone in that way of thinking. But part of what's happening today may be that we are a more impatient people than we used to be, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does make policy incrementalism and compromise more difficult. I mean, this is really a tough time for us flaming incrementalists. Today, if someone recommended a new social insurance program with benefits that did not begin for 7 years and half of all workers excluded, I doubt that person would be taken very seriously. But the original Social Security Act, passed in 1935, did just that. More recently, it took 18 years after the enactment of Medicaid before all the states, Arizona was the last, came into that program. Which brings me back to why we are gathered here tonight. Put simply, we need Marilyn Moon, and more like her, to help us chart our way forward, people who share her many attributes: thoughtful, analytical, open-minded, and taking the long view. Bob Ball would have been proud that Marilyn Moon is receiving this award in his name. Thank you.
think we can all understand why Bill made such a tremendous professional contribution in Congress, and one hopes that future Congresses will have more people like Bill. To maintain his credibility, I didn't go through his whole resume. I didn't titillate you with the fact that he was a founding member, and I believe even the acting chair at one point of Peekaboo. I could leave it at that, but I will clear his reputation by telling you that that's the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. So now let me introduce Kathy Swartz, professor at the Harvard School of Public Health.
When he ended on Peekaboo, I was ready to say maybe I should just haul him off. I'm glad for the clarification. And picking up on Bill Gradison's comment that we need more people like Marilyn and Bob Ball, it is truly my pleasure tonight to have to be able to introduce our next speaker, Karen Davis. She has contributed enormously to improvements in Medicare and Medicaid in her own academic research, in her 4 years as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Planning and Evaluation in the Carter administration, and then for almost 2 decades as the President of the Commonwealth Fund. As President of the Commonwealth Fund, Karen focused a large share of the fund's resources on ways to improve our social insurance programs. She made sure that research by Marilyn and others in this room received funding and congressional attention. Karen returned to the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health a little more than a year ago and is now the Lipitz Professor in the Department of Health Policy and Management and Director of the Roger C. Lipitz Center for Integrated Healthcare. It is my honor and very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Karen Davis.
Thank you, Kathy, for that lovely introduction. And congratulations to NASI on selecting, having the wisdom to select Marilyn Moon as this year's Robert M. Ball awardee. I came to Washington, I'm actually not going to say the year, but I came to Washington to work for Bob Ball. Well, actually, to work for Dorothy Rice, who was head of the Medicare research program, who worked for Ida Merriam, who was the Associate Commissioner for Research and Statistics, who worked for Bob Ball. But he was an extraordinary leader, and everyone at SSA was energized by his vision, his commitment to social insurance, and certainly his commitment to ensuring retirement with dignity. His leadership helped engender widespread support that exists today for Social Security and Medicare. One of the happiest things I did was to go and watch Bob testify before the Senate Finance Committee, and he had an art of making every question seem brilliant. And that was a stretch sometimes. But under Bob and Ida and Dorothy's leadership, it was really Social Security research over 50 years ago that documented that half of the elderly were uninsured, threatening not just the financial security of the elderly, but their children as well, who used up their savings helping their parents obtain medical care. And can you imagine where we would be today without Medicare? So I'm just very pleased and very honored to be able to speak about Marilyn tonight and the wonderful, important work she's done in showing how Medicare protects the elderly and disabled and ensures access to health care, and in doing so helps achieve Bob Ball's vision of security in old age without the prospect of bankruptcy from medical bills. Some of you may know that my friendship with Marilyn dates back to 1986 when she was the founding director of the AARP, Public Policy Institute. And we share a passion from those early days for improving health insurance coverage for the most vulnerable. And as our careers have moved along, I've been delighted to find ways to continue to work with Marilyn. We've co-authored articles on Medicare in 1995, again a decade later in 2005, calling for Medicare Extra, and we're still supporting a comprehensive Medicare program that integrates Part A and Part B. She was a great Commonwealth Fund grantee. She did pioneering analyses of the need for a prescription drug benefit and improved financial protection for Medicare beneficiaries. We're currently working together on a project for the Commonwealth Fund to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Medicare next year. And I think we're just kind of kicking that off now so that we can have a whole year-long celebration. There isn't time this evening. I know you're all waiting for your main course, so I won't be able to do justice for all that Marilyn has accomplished, but I would like to say just a few things. Over the years, she's produced 4 books on Medicare, looking broadly at the Medicare program from a beneficiary perspective. She's called attention to issues around the structure of Medicare cost sharing. We heard from Secretary Sebelius and from Sheila Burke that at the request of Senator Dole, when she was at the Congressional Budget Office, she did some of the first reports that really provided a caution about changes that would increase cost sharing for beneficiaries. It's a body of work, later funded by the Commonwealth Fund, that's really furthered the understanding of just how much beneficiaries now pay out of pocket for health care. And in doing that, really deterred any attempt to try to shift more costs onto beneficiaries. She was a pioneer in tracking cost growth in Medicare, contrasting it with private insurance, and now that type of analysis is routinely done by the trustees and others, and I'm sure Marilyn had a lot to do with that as a public trustee of Medicare. Her work has focused especially on those with modest and low incomes and the special needs they have. She's done research on how to include the value of health benefits in alternative poverty measures that have been used by census. And more recently, she has worked on the potential impact of premium support on beneficiaries and striking a cautionary note about the dangers of relying on individual insurance market to provide adequate and equitable coverage for those most at risk. And at a time that millions of boomers born after World War II are coming to depend on Social Security and Medicare, it's a time of great opportunity and great challenges. Marilyn and NASI are helping prepare us for the difficult policy choices ahead. Their leadership will help ensure that there is and will remain a robust and vibrant health insurance system for all Americans, particularly for the elderly, disabled, and those who are most vulnerable. Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little." Marilyn, for the 30 years that I have known you, your work has helped ensure progress on behalf of those who have too little. So on behalf of all of us here this evening and many others, thank you, and we wish you continued leadership and dedication in the years ahead.
That was terrific. And Karen, I've known you 14 years longer than you've known Marilyn. Actually, as a personal note, Karen is the first PhD in economics woman that I ever met, in spite of the fact that I knew graduate students who were women at MIT. But you were the first, and I met you 2 weeks into a job with Stuart. So back when we thought national health insurance was going to happen then. Before we all start dinner, I just want to take a minute on behalf of Bruce Vladeck and myself to acknowledge and thank the members of the event committee, Karen being one of them, Bob Reischauer being another. Where's Chris Jennings? Chris Jennings, Sheila Burke, thank you, Chris. Sheila Burke, Judy Fader, Steve Goss, Susan Denser, welcome, Gail Walensky, Liz Fowler, Pamela Hurd, Dan Mendelson, Stanford Ross, Donna Shalala, Jean Sturley, who I saw over there, and Tim Smeeting. It was an honor and a privilege to work with all of you, and I think I speak for everybody on the committee when I say that we were enthusiastic about helping to create an event to honor Marilyn and to help sustain NASI. I know that Bruce Vladeck is very sorry not to be here tonight. He had been looking forward to this event since last February, and he wanted to be able to toast Marilyn in person. I know that he sent you a note. I also want to acknowledge the indefatigable and steady efforts of Christine Quinio and her staff. Where is she? There she is. And finally, I want to thank all of you who traveled some distances to get here tonight to honor Marilyn. It speaks volumes about Marilyn's network of friends she has mentored over the years. So now, please enjoy dinner, and we will reconvene before dessert is served. Before.
Can I ask all of you to please be seated? Thank you. I'm Bill Arnone. I have the honor of chairing the Board of Directors of the National Academy of Social Insurance. And it's just looking out tonight at a spectacular gathering. It really bodes well for the future of the Academy and the tribute we're going to be formally presenting tonight to Marilyn. I was asked to chair the board about a year ago, and my first question was, well, what am I supposed to do? And I would say, well, you have to preside over board meetings. I go, well, what else? There were about a whole list of things. I kept saying, what else? What else? What else? Oh, by the way, you get to present the Robert Ball Award. I said, I accept the position. It's really one of the highlights of our year as the Academy. When I look out at all of you and I see the collection of brain power dedicated to social insurance, I can't help but paraphrase something President Kennedy once said: never has there been such a gathering of intellectual firepower in the field of social insurance in one room, with the possible exception of when Bob Ball dined all by himself. Here at the NASI. My thanks on behalf of the Academy go to Kathleen Sebelius, Bill Gradison, Karen Davis for the comments you made this evening in tribute to Marilyn. It's really made this evening truly memorable. As you know, the Academy was founded in 1986. It's been quite a journey. And it was one of Bob Ball's visions to have a nonprofit entity that specialized in all aspects of social insurance and could groom future leaders in this complicated field. And Marilyn was one of the founding members back then of the Academy, so her fingerprints are all over this organization. We're still in a battle to promote public understanding of social insurance. Why do we have these programs? So the Academy's mission, which is to advance solutions to the challenges facing the nation that are susceptible to a social insurance solution, never ends. And it's with voices like Marilyn's that enable us to continue this ongoing challenge. Like Bob Ball and like previous winners of this award, some of whom are with us tonight. Is Steve Goss here, Steve? Previous winner of the award. Bob Reischauer, you already heard from. Bob won the award previously. Bob. You've heard Bruce Vladeck mentioned that he regrets terribly not being here, but he was also a previous recipient of the Bob Ball Award. Like them, Marilyn is committed to strengthening social insurance and really facing head-on, candidly, with intellectual honesty, the challenges that constantly we face when it comes to supporting and promoting and justifying social insurance programs. Marilyn's track record is incomparable. She's been a true leader, a dedicated public servant. I had the pleasure tonight of sitting next to her husband, Douglas. Behind every married woman is a husband who is supporting her efforts. So Douglas, you've heard about all the different hats that Marilyn has worn, not the least of which was she was a public trustee. She wrote a columnist for the Washington Post. Someone suggested I refer to that as moonlighting, but I would never, ever make a terrible pun like that. And in everything she has done, she has used diligent research and unquestionable facts to promote solutions. And that really is what the National Academy tries to do. So, Marilyn, your work, starting 3 decades ago with positions at the Congressional Budget Office, the Urban Institute, AARP, and currently as an Institute Fellow and Director of AIR's Center on Aging, which is a path-breaking effort in and of itself. You have influenced countless policymakers and really, as we've heard before, impacted the lives of millions of Americans, including the most vulnerable of our citizens. One of my passions as the chair of our board, and some of you who work at the Academy are probably tired of hearing me saying this, is not to call us NASI. We are the Academy, the National Academy of Social Insurance. It's going to take a while, but I'll feel really good when we call it a few extra syllables. But I have another reason for that. Marilyn and her husband are movie buffs. And I've always wanted to be able to say, the Academy Award goes to. So, it reads, the National Academy of Social Insurance presents the Robert M. Ball Award for 2014 for outstanding achievements in social insurance to Marilyn Moon. Marilyn? You want to turn it around? I don't think I feel to see the writing.
Okay. Here you go. With the two of them.
Hey, all right.
Now you can pick it back. I don't want to drop it. Thank you very much. This is a really strange and kind of surreal experience, and I really appreciate you all coming. But I feel kind of odd about the whole thing. There's just something kind of strange about listening to people talk about you, where you're not quite sure that that's right, and you want to get up and correct the record a little bit now and then. But nonetheless, I thought, well, okay, how am I going to handle this? And so I decided I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to say, yes, absolutely. I deserve this award. And in fact, if you saw the pictures that were shown here when I was asked to provide some pictures, one of the ones I decided to provide was the, as a good healthcare economist, was the clinic charges for my delivery and my first well baby visit of $3. We are not solving the healthcare problems yet, but that's something I hope to do before I retire. So even then, I was interested. And you've heard a lot about Kansas. I was interested in Kansas that also had a crucible kind of effect on me in terms of Medicare as well. When I was in high school, we debated the proposition of whether or not there should be social insurance healthcare program for senior citizens. And if you were in Kansas, you always wanted to be on the negative. You would always win on the negative, not on the positive. But nonetheless, a little bit of a contrarian, I decided that I still like the positive as well. I also have to thank some people tonight. One of the people that I want to thank is my father, who, if you were at the reception earlier, you heard a little bit about. My father knew Bob Dole. I was one of 5 children. I have 4 brothers that did 2 major things for me. One is it means that I could speak without a microphone tonight if necessary and be heard. The second is that my father wasn't very much of a fan of women's rights, though nonetheless, when there were 5 of us, just couldn't quite distinguish. So he did a very nice job of making me an independent thinker and helping raise me to think on my own. It made him a little unhappy later in his life when he learned that that's part of what he had achieved. But nonetheless, it was great growing up in Kansas and has an impact. I also want to thank all the role models and mentors and colleagues that I've had over the years, and I don't want to try to mention everybody because that would be tough, and it would mean I'd leave somebody out and I'd get really bad publicity later on. But one of the things that I wanted to mention is that I think what's really important for women of my generation is the importance not only of having role models and mentors, but often we didn't have as many role models and mentors as we might have liked. And instead, we relied upon really good friends and colleagues. And I have been very fortunate over the years to have so many of them, a number of people here in this audience. And some people that I'm going to just call out tonight, and nonetheless, Judy Fader, Catherine McLaughlin, Kathy Swartz, Karen Politz, Linda Blumberg. We call ourselves Women of Self-Indulgence, and we get together periodically and talk about all of you. And as well as share tips and other things about surviving in this world. But seriously, it is really wonderful to have colleagues like that you can rely on. And for all of you young interns and other folks who are just coming up in this world, it is really what makes life as a researcher, as an analyst, and so forth worthwhile, because you really can depend upon friends, and it makes things really interesting and exciting. And finally, I have to say thank you very much to my husband, Douglas Gumry, who is my cheerleader, my role model, my confidant, and puts me to shame in terms of publications and other things. So if you believe any of that publicity you heard about me tonight, he puts me to shame. There we go. So I'm going to speak pretty briefly tonight because I know those of you who haven't finished your desserts will want to do so. The only thing that's worse than talking after dinner is talking before dinner before everybody gets theirs, and there's nothing worse than hearing someone say, "That's okay, I'm almost done, just 34 more slides." And you know who you are. But I wanted to just say a few things when I was asked to talk tonight about what I think is the importance of the future of social insurance, and something that I do feel passionate about, and that is of the things that we all can do to try to help promote and keep the social insurance that is such an important part of the fabric of our society, and that I think goes often unrecognized by a lot of people, although they depend upon it every day. They'll tell you in polls they don't believe that Social Security will be there or Medicare will be there, but look at their actions, as I was as I was taught as an economist to always do. Don't ask what people say, look at what they do, and they act as though they need Social Security and Medicare every day, and indeed I think that is the case. To some extent, I'm preaching to the choir tonight, I think, But this choir is one that is heard in Washington and elsewhere, and I think that's a really important role that we all can play. We need to reinforce the message that social insurance was not only relevant in the 1930s when Social Security came in, and the 60s when Medicare came in, but today as well. And in fact, in many ways, as I'm going to try to say for a few moments, I think it may even be more needed than it has been in the past for a number of reasons. But the good research that people in this room do needs to be done and continued to remind decision makers about the implications of proposals to change these programs, to think creatively about change when it's necessary, and to stand firm when it's not necessary in indicating that to policymakers. And for those people who are members of the Academy who are not researchers, but rather are folks who are in the trenches every day running these programs, making sure that they meet the needs of people, making sure that they are operating the way that they should. The good stewardship that goes behind that is also part of the success of this program, of these programs, and a critical aspect of what we do, and I commend all of those actions. For example, I was very thrilled originally when Steve Goss was the first winner, I believe, of the Robert M. Ball Award. It's something that is really wonderful to see a public servant who gets recognized for that wonderful work that he does. The basic reasons and rationale for establishing Social Security in the 1930s and Medicare in the 1960s really have not changed. And they are fairly standard, and we can talk about them. I will leave a few out, I'm sure, but think about some of the basic reasoning behind social insurance programs. First, financial security and health insurance represent insurable events. That's an important piece of the whole notion of social insurance. Saving for retirement is great, but there are always those times in which the unemployment, healthcare problems, and so forth intervene, family crises and challenges that mean that people don't save for retirement in the way that they can. Health expenditures come along in ways that work as the reverse lottery, taking away people's life savings, causing other problems, and without Social Security and Medicare, life would be much worse for America's seniors and people with disabilities in the United States. Moreover, it is important to understand that society has a stake in these insurable events as well. The stability that Medicare and Social Security provide is something that is important to families, to the individuals themselves, and to society as a whole when it bolsters the living standards of people in their later years. We've chosen to think of social insurance in many ways in the United States as for people at the end of life. It's not necessary that that's the only place where it occurs. It was a good place to start. I think that we've made some inroads in some areas like the Affordable Care Act, but also the Earned Income Tax Credit and other things that can be thought of as moving towards social insurance in some ways, although they lack some of the characteristics of social insurance and perhaps could benefit from moving further in that direction. Another key aspect of social insurance is its progressive nature. That's an important element and one that's not always obvious to individuals, but is essential and has been there since the beginning and is something that needs to be celebrated and protected, and that's something that I think is really important today. Linking programs to the direct contribution for them in the future, I believe, has strengthened the loyalty and acceptance of these programs, and that is one way in which, for example, Social Security and Medicare are different than programs that are nonetheless very important, like Medicaid, and may help explain why those programs are treated better and thought of more positively by individuals. They believe that they have a stake in the system, they've contributed, and they believe they have an earned right for those benefits, and I think that's really important. Related to this, and another thing that makes social insurance very different than other kinds of benefits that we have in our society is a focus on inclusion rather than exclusion. Americans like to think about ways in which we can make sure that nobody who does not deserve a benefit gets it. We're really careful about that. We've got tough eligibility standards. We've got checks. We've got balances. And we're happy in many cases to make sure that nobody gets into a program that shouldn't belong. And in that case, we make the error sometimes of excluding people who should not be excluded when our emphasis is on doing so to keep people out. Social Security and Medicare have always been more about inclusion, and I think that's a really important element and something that should not be left aside when we talk about these programs. It's analogous to statisticians who talk about type 1 errors and type 2 errors. If you push too hard on one thing, if you push too hard on making sure that you've got really tough eligibility standards, then there are people who are just never going to apply. And fortunately, Social Security and Medicare are not that way. And finally, I believe that the private sector has never been able or willing to fully take on these protections. It is not because the private sector is evil or anything of that sort. It is not the business of private companies, for example, to redistribute income in the United States. We shouldn't simply expect that to happen. It is not the business of private industry to be able to pool risks in the same way that you can pool for the whole society that Social Security and Medicare do. So when we get enthusiastic about thinking about the private sector stepping up to the plate, it's simply not going to be able to. And in many ways, Social Security and Medicare allow the private sector to do things that it never would have otherwise been able to or willing to do, such as supplement Social Security, such as supplement Medicare in terms of additional programs that wrap around these programs. Moreover, we're in an environment in which employers are finding it more challenging in many ways to provide all of the benefits that people otherwise might come to expect, particularly if we relied upon the private sector to do so. Even though these are basic tenets, they're tenets that have remained in place today, and I think that as things have changed, some of these elements have become ever more important. At the same time, when people sometimes talk about the world is changing and therefore we need to go back somehow to something else, that the need to fit new changes and situations is appropriate to then see some of our programs change, but not simply because it's politically expedient to do so or it's become inconvenient to talk about things. For example, the rising costs of health care over time explain a lot of Medicare's growth, but that's not a problem that we should lay at the feet of individuals. That's something that is more of a systemic change that has occurred that needs a systemic and concerted effort to improve in the future. So rather than saying Medicare has become too expensive, we have to pull back, in many ways, the high costs of healthcare mean that we have to be doubling down in terms of trying to retain these programs and improve them over time. So what are some of the changes that have occurred that I think we need to be cognizant of and working towards? First is inequality. You're hearing a lot about that these days, but it's been around for a long time and it's been getting worse for a long time. And it's something that social insurance does help mitigate to some extent. We need to figure out ways in which we may want to think about changing that further. For example, particularly in the case of Social Security, which is a direct reflection of the inequality that occurs in the wages and salaries that people receive over time, and to some extent in the dropout years that occur when you have a great recession where young people don't get jobs for many years and may have some problems. Social Security is there and the rules can help it, but some of those rules might need to be thought about and changed over time. We talked for a very long time, for example, about potentially increasing the number of years that are required to become eligible for Social Security benefits. But if we're going to have periods of insecurity like we've had with the Great Recession, we may need to think about whether or not that's really a good idea. We may need to think about whether or not we want to make the formulas for calculating the primary insurance amount more progressive rather over time to account for and adjust for some of these inequalities. As the share of income going to the very top of the population has gone up, we may want to think about rules that say that Social Security is funded by a tax that is capped at a certain level, and we may want to think about changing that. These are all the kinds of changes that you might want to think about and consider, not to retrench from the program, but to adjust to important societal changes, and in this case, inequality. A second major change that's been occurring in the United States may be a little bit more of a self-correcting issue, and that is the age of retirement. I was doing a lot of work in the years when everybody was wringing their hands and saying, the age of retirement is going down, down, down. What are we going to do? People are going to spend a third of their lives, lounging around and drawing Social Security. That has actually changed. But what has not changed are some of the other things that are going on, such as longer life expectancy and so forth, that we need to think about. We need to think about what is the right balance and what do we want that right balance to be. Some of those changes may be different than what we're anticipating, but they are ones that may be driven by societal changes. Pardon me. A third change that's been occurring is the cost of health care, which I already sort of presaged a little bit by suggesting that that's something that's a little bit of a blame the victim kind of issue at the moment, where we want to point fingers and talk about retrenching on the Medicare program. But Medicare, I would remind you, has never been a generous program, particularly. And the much higher rise in prices for health care than for other goods and services is felt directly not only by taxpayers and the federal government, but by the beneficiaries in terms of their higher out-of-pocket costs. And employers recognizing this are stepping back and not stepping forward. Again, a rationale, a reason for thinking about whether or not we want to change in the direction that some people suggest of retrenching on the program. And finally, the private sector, we need to think about how those changes are occurring and whether or not the private sector is ready and willing and anxious to step up to the plate. I think the attempts to privatize Social Security are kind of over. We don't talk about that very much anymore. The Great Recession kind of put that to bed for a lot of people, as well as a number of other elements and things, including, I think, good research that showed to individuals that that Social Security is not a bad deal for individuals. And I think that a lot of careful analysis that went in did help to kind of smack back some of the movement in that direction. The changes in Medicare are more difficult to deal with because Medicare is a complicated program in which you're not providing benefits directly to the individual, but instead you are providing benefits that come through a third party, that is, the providers of services. So there's a lot of things that could potentially be done, as well as mischief to be made, but that leads us in many cases to be both more enthusiastic about potentially finding ways to solve the problems, and I think that might be good. But I would also caution that we need to be careful in remembering and keeping our eyes on the prize of what the goal of the Medicare program is, and that is not just to compensate providers of care reasonably, which should happen, but to protect the beneficiaries of those programs and making sure that that's preeminent and looking at it. And that means making sure that we have a system that treats the providers fairly, but that also holds we hold ourselves accountable for improving the situations over time. I think that improvements can be a win-win if we find ways to have greater efficiencies in healthcare, but one person's very inefficient benefit is another person's vital service and a provider's important income, and that makes it very difficult to deal with this. So Medicare has the promise of being something there's more you can play with, but that also means that there's a lot more damage to particularly be done. And I would caution people about the whole notion of empowering consumers. I'm all for empowering consumers, but not if what that means is we're empowering individuals to charge consumers more and hence impoverishing consumers in our zeal to make them greater and more effective consumers of health care. Few of us are excellent consumers of health care when we are sick, which is when it costs the most and when it is the most productive to find ways to save costs. That's something that I think we have to think of as a partnership that exists among consumers and providers and the federal government. And I think there's a very important role for the federal government to play in mitigating all of these kinds of changes. So I think that I would just close by saying the increased skepticism about government and the hostility to higher taxes can be exploited by those who argue that we've outgrown our need for these social insurance programs or that we can no longer afford them. And I don't think either of those claims is true, but unless people like those of you in this room stand up and say very firmly, these are important programs, they do the things they are intended to do, sure they can be improved, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We will be in trouble. So it is important for all of us to really take this as a challenge to keep the notion of social insurance alive in the United States. Thank you very much. And the one thing I forgot to say that I meant to say was when Bob Ball called me many years ago and asked me to become a member of the National Academy of Social Insurance, I was positively giddy that someone as important as Bob Ball knew my name. And that's been probably one of the more meaningful things that's happened to me. So thank you, Bob, wherever you are.
So thank you for that talk, and I hope that we can all get copies of it. I want to hand it to my students. So it's my pleasure to introduce Judy Fader, who was the chair of the selection committee for this year's Robert Ball Award, to lead us in a toast.
Thank you, Kathy. And it is our privilege, Marilyn, to honor you as a champion of social insurance, as the recipient of a Bob Ball ought to be. You are a champion in many respects. Your excellence in scholarship, your intellect, as your husband recognizes in particular, in all your contributions that have enhanced public policy is, bar none, you are at the top. You are indeed a champion. But being a champion also means using your voice to stand up, to be a stand-up woman for social insurance, which you have demonstrated again tonight. You use your voice to speak truth to power. You use your voice to speak up for beneficiaries on every occasion, be they high or low income. And you use your voice to speak to beneficiaries to explain this very complicated system to people who are trying to work their way through it. You have built multiple institutions that are committed to the same goal, who are standing up for the social insurance that we need so badly. And so just one more thing before I ask everybody to, it's water in mine, I don't know what the rest of you are drinking, but to raise a glass to Marilyn, I want to be very clear. You have laid out an agenda for what we need to continue doing. So this is not a farewell to Marilyn party. This is a tribute to what you have done and what we know you are going to continue to do So please join me in raising a glass to our social insurance champion, recipient of the 2014 Robert M. Ball Award, my friend, Marilyn Moon.
So I think we are now through formally, and please enjoy yourselves and continue talking, and watch the pictures of Marilyn, I hope. Thank you all for coming.